Okay, is everybody ready? Because it is now 2 p.m. on the button. So let's see, we've got a quorum by far. So Mary Lou, Mary Ann, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. So I'll call this meeting to order. It's the Environmental Advisory Committee meeting for March the 8th, 2023. It's now 2:00 p.m. And the first order of business is to call the roll. So Mary Ann, could you do that for us, please?
Sure. Chair Bradford.
Here.
Vice Chair Shaw.
Here.
Committee Member Freese.
Here.
Committee Member Nader. Committee Member Redmond.
Here.
Okay, so we have a quorum. The next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Are there any additions, deletions, or modifications that anybody wishes to make? Hearing none, I just want to say this to you, that Lynn Britt is here, that she's at the end of this table. She's the staff member that's been working on the greenhouse gas issue for Tequesta. And she is going to be joined by a gentleman from Ickley at 2:30. So we may not get to the presentation until 2:30, until that person, is he going to be on Zoom?
He is.
Okay. All right. So we'll start with our stuff, and we'll stop whenever this fellow arrives. So with that, is there a motion to approve today's agenda? I'll entertain a motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Nays? Motion carries. Communications from citizens. Does anyone in the audience wish to speak? You're welcome to if you wanted to. We'll move right along. We're going to skip presentations, as I just mentioned. And the next item on the agenda is consent agenda. We have the minutes of the February 8 meeting for our consideration. Does anybody have any additions, deletions, or modifications to those minutes? There being none, I wanted to let you know, Mary Ann, that there's a section in there about shoreline modifications that were talked about with the Bureau of Land Management property on the south of Beach Road in Jupiter, I believe. If you would just put the capital letters BLM before the word shoreline, so that way we'll all remember that future people that read it will know we're talking about Bureau of Land Management. So with that, can I get a motion to adopt the minutes as modified?
Motion to adopt.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor of those minutes signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Motion carries. That's the end of the consent agenda. And let's see now. All right, so let's just do a real quick check here. In regard to the revisit of the draft recommendations of the housing element, are there any changes that anyone wishes?
Do you mind if we swear in our new members?
Oh, I forgot, yes. No, I don't mind.
All right, just take a minute and I can do both.
Yes, that'll help.
They don't even need to stand up.
So we'll stop with this and we'll do the official swearing in of these new board members.
Yeah. This before the meeting started.
So I'll do both of you all at the same time. You're just going to state your own name when you repeat after me, right? Okay, I state your name.
I, Clay Damon,
I, Jill Wenta,
Do solemnly swear or affirm
do solemnly swear or affirm
do solemnly swear or affirm
that I will support,
that I will support,
that I will support,
protect, and defend
protect, and defend
the Constitution of the government
the Constitution of the government
of the United States
of the
of the
United
United
States
States
and of the state of Florida,
and of the state of Florida,
and that I am duly qualified
that I am duly qualified
to hold office,
to hold office,
and that I will well and faithfully
and that I will well and faithfully
perform the
perform the duties
duties of Environmental Advisory Committee
of Environmental Advisory Committee,
on which I am about to enter.
of which I am about to enter.
Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right, congratulations.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Can do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Should we explain to him what sunshine laws?
Yeah, probably.
Okay, wonderful, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So my colleague to my right mentioned just to me that perhaps we should let both of you know about Florida's sunshine law and help you understand it. None of us are lawyers, but I've dealt with it for over 40 years, so I'll tell you what I know, so it'll help guide you. The short and easy way to deal with Florida's sunshine law is to not discuss matters with others on your board that may come before you on the environmental committee. You can talk to us about anything on the planet, and you can even tiptoe around some environmental issues or make suggestions, but anything that could be construed as seeking an agreement as to what would be done by you and others on the board is not kosher, and it could get you in trouble. And so I think you may have noticed that I have seen articles, for example, that I think are pertinent to what we do, and I will send them to all of us, and you'll see at the bottom, please do not respond to avoid violation of Florida's sunshine law. So what that is warning everyone about is that if you might construe that since I sent you that I'm in favor of what that article is saying. But that may or may not be true. But if you can start a back and forth conversation with the author or the person that forwarded that to you, it can create problems. So the way to avoid it is to say, well, okay, here's a nice, interesting piece of information, but we're not going to talk about it. You could talk about it here, but you can't talk about it outside of that.
Sure.
So that being the case, it sounds like it might be easy, right, to deal with what is not kosher. But in this regard, the one other thing to keep in mind is the, what's the word I'm looking for? It's the, for example, if Jill and Clay are riding on a golf cart on Sequesta Country Club playing golf, there may be nothing harmful about that whatsoever, except it might give the impression that you're talking about business, and sometimes that can be as bad as actually doing it. So you have to always keep in mind the appearance of what's going on. And so just those to me are the two key aspects of the whole thing, is appearance, try to avoid, even though it's perfectly legal. You can even have lunch together as long as you don't talk about matters that come before this board. But then there's that appearance thing.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Regarding that, because there are three of us that do work together, on and off, not all the time, but, emails will be going back and forth, but it'll all be business, not this business. So, if they're, yeah, good?
No problem.
Okay.
It's not a problem. It's A-okay.
Wait a second. There are gonna be times like today that we
we
were
just saw
with
each other.
clients and saw each other.
Yeah,
you
that's
know.
fine. That's,
Okay.
It's life.
It's, yeah,
Yeah.
and if it's not business that this board deals with or could deal with.
Right.
You're fine.
Okay, all right,
You're fine.
thank you.
Does anybody want to add anything to that? I tried to just keep it short and simple. Okay, so, going back to the agenda. Let me get my screen up here. So, if we follow sequence, the next item is the revisit of the draft recommendations of the housing element of the Tequesta comp plan for consideration of the village council staff and the planning and zoning board. And by the way, just so everybody, all this work we've been doing, the comprehensive plan per the ordinances of the village is a program or process that is handled initially by the planning and zoning board. So I imagine that we will be at some point, someday, sometime, explaining to that board what our recommendations are. Does anybody have anything that they saw in that voluminous document that they'd like to talk about or change or anything? Russ?
I just had a couple of things. So I noticed that you had made recommendations related to green building and landscaping as it came up in those housing elements. But I
Yeah.
also noticed that some of the recommendations seem to go beyond environmental recommendations.
Yes.
And I just wanted to say that I'm personally uncomfortable making those types of recommendations.
Mm-hmm.
So, anytime it mentioned the types of houses or the types of, or the number of relations or non-relation people, all that kind of stuff, I didn't feel comfortable with those recommendations, and I think that I just wanted to say that.
I
Try to
understand.
keep it to the environmental.
Well, we have deviated before.
Yeah.
But I don't remember, the only thing that I remember that stands out in my mind was that I saw something where that which was stated in the comp plan was extremely more liberal than what the state required. And it had to do with allowing for group homes in a community.
Right.
That you have to allow it to happen, but so a minimal way of allowing it to happen would be to only allow it within one zoning district. Tequesta's comp plan says it's allowed anywhere. So I said, I was putting like, a flashing light saying,
Right.
like, ladies and gentlemen, this is way more liberal than what is required by law.
Right. And so, that, for example, like I might agree with that, but I'm not comfortable, I might or might not agree with it, but I'm not comfortable making a recommendation with that type of.
Okay,
Well, I think I have one sort of
One.
similar.
okay.
Maybe this is what Russ was also getting at, was on page 7, the issue of auxiliary dwelling units.
Yes,
And your rewrite
I remember that one.
wanted to restrict it to only allowing those for family members. Again, this is, yeah.
Right.
I think
Stuff
it's-
like that.
I think it's
Anything
out of
like
our
that.
purview, and
Yeah.
I personally don't agree with that. But
Well, I just took, I took the liberty of addressing that one because when I worked in Palm Beach, what they originally did was exactly what I was fearing here, was they allowed, let's just call it granny flats. And then they realized they had shot themselves in the foot years later when the original occupant was a relative, and it turned into being an apartment that someone was renting out behind and in a single-family zoning district. And so, I forgot how I structured it, but
You said related.
yeah, it should be related only. And that's very hard to,
Define.
hard to enforce. Because, you have to figure out who's related to who and all that. So I don't know so would you like me in those two instances to just leave it as it was originally written? Would that be the better?
That would be fine for me.
Yeah, someone else can make that recommendation. You know.
What about
Or
the
make
rest
it, or
of
make
you?
it, beyond the scope of the environmental advisory
Make
committee.
a note to draft to somebody or pass it off to somebody maybe.
Jessica, did you say something?
I was just saying, like, maybe there could be a list, if like that sort of thing we could pass off, you could feel like we've responsibly passed it on to somebody else, or something, then, or let them know that that was something that well, I guess no. You're,
Yeah, I don't want.
right,
I
any
don't
sort
want- I
of
don't want any
affiliation, yeah,
weeds.
no, I see, we.
Yeah.
So I stopped there, I'm like.
You could look at it like,
Let's
you
try.
may or may not agree with those things that I wrote. And yes, they are not related to the environment. But when it goes to the Planning and Zoning Board, they're not just looking at environmental stuff. And perhaps someone needs to raise a red flag with them every now and then about other stuff. And I guess I can see where Russ is saying he's not comfortable saying this is our recommendation. I get that. I'm just wondering, when you see something problematic, should you say something is all I'm trying. I don't know.
I don't have a problem with you individually
Yeah, I
making the
know.
recommendation. I don't want to be a part of that particular recommendation.
So what should we do to make everybody happy? Should we strike and just leave those? I'm thinking of these two now. One would be the whatever the proper word is for, say, an apartment behind a single-family home. Do they have a term for it?
Auxiliary dwelling unit.
Yeah, auxiliary dwelling
Say that
unit. Should we just leave it as it was and just say no comment in that case, as well as the one about the, what was it?
The group home.
Yeah. Is that what everyone's preference would be, to do something like that? All right, so are there any other things that we?
Yeah, I don't want to go crazy, but it wasn't just those. I started noticing it just with the very first element, and even that one where you made, and you're probably right about this, that so it just says to assure the availability of sustainable, decent, safe, sanitary, affordable housing, and you're probably right about the fact that the market is more powerful than the village to be able to control those things. I'm with you on that, but also I don't have a problem with the village wanting to have those things, and if it's making an attempt to have those things, I don't have a problem with it. But it's not an environmental issue, so I don't want to address it. Is all. Like anything that's not environmental on this, I don't want to address it at all.
Well, they use the word sustainable.
Right.
And
I guess in the I guess when you bring in the market, that made me think that you're more speaking to other issues on that list, because that's a list of like 8 different things.
see, I don't mind that they want to get involved with having affordable housing, but they say to assure it.
Right.
Assure it. And
No,
that's
I'm
when
with
I
you,
say,
yeah.
they can't control the market.
Yeah, factually, it's a poor statement. So I'm with you on that. Factually, it's a poor statement, but I don't know that I want to go changing anything that isn't specifically. Housing's tricky, When you start talking about housing, you're talking about it's a different issue, right? And so us having to deal with the housing element is already kind of tricky until the issues of green building or landscaping become involved with it, and then I'm willing to give my input. But anything else,
Well, do you
it's
have-
above my pay grade.
Do you have a list of the items? That
No, I didn't itemize it.
Okay, can we go down the list and I'll mark them and then I'll.
There's just, I mean, 3 for me.
Okay, go ahead, Brad.
1, 2, 0,
1, 2, 0, okay.
1, 2, 7,
Mm-hmm.
and 1, 4, 2.
Okay.
Are the ones that I saw that didn't really have much to do with environmental.
So the second one was 1, 2, 7?
Correct.
The first one, the green.
That's the one that I talked about.
Yeah.
And that's the one that you brought up?
And the 1, 4, 2 is the group home. The 1, 2, 0 is the adequate and affordable housing.
Okay. Anything
don't-
else, Russ, that you can point to?
I mean, yeah, I wasn't doing a point by point. I didn't, you know what I mean? So I just kind of in general was trying to avoid.
So I can envision you throwing your hands up at your desk at home. and say,
Yeah. No,
This Bradford.
Yeah, really.
no. There is no desk.
Okay. Well, I can make those 3 stay as is. So is that
Wow. Another one. 1, 2, 1.
1, 2, 1. What was that one about, Brad?
It's related to 1, 2, 0,
Oh.
the affordable housing. And I mean, I guess there's more. 1, 2, 2 as well. It's all along the same lines. I think all of 1, 2, 3.
But the 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 2, he didn't change. It says fine as written.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
So
I didn't
which
see
ones
that.
can I strike now? 1, 2,
1, 2.
It's only 1, 2, 0. That
1,
he
2,
made it.
0.
Yeah, that he
You're
made
right.
it. Or did he even? No, he didn't.
He had a proposed option.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the proposed.
So
option.
1, 2, 0 you want changed. 1, 2, and 3 are okay. When I say
Wait, 1,
Correct.
2,
You have
0.
fine as written on those, so
Okay.
that they're not changing anyway.
Even 1, 2, 0 says
So we're still down to 3.
Does it? 1, 2, 0?
I think. Am I looking at it crazy?
Mm.
Under EAC proposed options, doesn't it say fine as written?
Oh, it does. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
All right, so there's only 2.
I was
1,
late,
2,
so
7,
I'm
and 1,
nervous
4,
to
2.
speak here. But yeah. that
All
was-
right, so 1, 2, 7, and 1,
1,
4,
4,
2.
2.
Yeah.
My apologies.
Any last call for change?
No. 1, 2, 7 is.
How about that, what was the say, I can't read my own writing. Is it 1.4.2? Is that one of them?
That's correct.
Okay.
If I go through later and look more closely, can I just email you?
Yes, yes, please do. And I'll hold off for a few days till I hear from yours. If I don't hear from you, say,
Sounds good.
okay?
Thank you.
So I'll make as it stands right now, 1.2.7 and 1.4.2.
And 1.4.4.
1.4.4. They will be modified to simply say fine as written. Okay, so now it's like 6 or 7 minutes till 2:30. I don't think we should dive into the next item because we're going to need more than 6 minutes to deal with that.
That's for sure.
So, Lynn, is there anything that you can start to talk about at this point in time?
Yeah, we can start to talk, and then Jay can join at 2:30, he had a meeting before. So
So, folks, we're, just for the record, so you know, we're going now to the item under the heading of presentation on the agenda.
Okay, so just to recap, the EAC had requested that the village perform a baseline greenhouse gas inventory, which we did in partnership with ICLEI, which is the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives. And that was in November of last year. We've now moved forward to document some of the climate action items that the village has already undertaken or is going to be undertaking to reduce its carbon footprint and make energy efficiency improvements. So this is the document that we presented. I did pass out the inventory and climate action plan in advance to the EAC, in case you had any comments. I was contacted by Bob Shore, who asked if to come in and present on that, which I'm doing now. So we have already presented. I'm going to go to page 20, which is our update, which begins our climate action plan. Okay, so this is capturing from Public Works and from our Utilities Department all the actions that, as I said, we've taken to date. One of the main areas of concern for greenhouse gas emissions is transportation. And we've listed here, as I say, the items that the village has already undertaken, the actions to reduce its carbon footprint, or things that can be considered to contribute toward that. As you likely know, we converted a lane on US 1 into a bike lane. And that is to be, you know, when you're looking at it from a climate action standpoint, that can contribute towards your carbon reductions, because of course less cars on the road, less emissions. And in conjunction with that, we're also going to be doing a canopy tree coverage assessment and replacement. And that also lowers the heat, reducing your carbon emissions. So that first bullet, we have investing in infrastructure, which was the conversion to the bike lanes, increasing the bike networks. In addition, during COVID, we started the shift from in-person meetings to virtual meetings, which has continued. And again, that means less cars on the road, less people traveling from meeting to meeting. Public Works is also exploring adding electric charging stations for the village's vehicle fleet. So that's something that's earmarked for end of 2023, beginning of 2024. Okay, the next section we're looking at is energy initiatives, and if anyone has any questions or comments as we go through, let me know. I'm going to document, and then I can incorporate into our next draft.
You just mentioned the charging stations for the village's fleet.
Yes.
Going in 23, 24, but do we have any EV vehicles in our fleet?
Public Works is looking into, in the future, potentially obtaining one. I know that also Utilities is, but that's something that maybe down the road.
One of the things that I remember reading somewhere was that it's since I think up to 50% of all new vehicle sales in the year 2030 will be EVs, or estimated to be EVs, that it's wise to provide EV charging stations for employees to use, so that it facilitates them coming and going to work, and their greenhouse gases coming and going to work count in our inventory.
Yes. And Jake can also speak about some of the FPL programs, including for that electric charger infrastructure. So we'll pin that to when Jake joins as well.
Okay.
Has he joined yet? All right, so on our energy initiatives, now this information is from Public Works, who's in charge of the procurement and these items. So today they have increased energy efficiency by utilizing combined light emitting diodes with light sensors, which are called photocells, which are the most energy efficient bulbs available. Public Works has converted 75% of the municipal buildings' perimeter and parking lights to LEDs on a combination of photocells and time clocks. They've also converted 75% of the municipal buildings' interior lights to LEDs with several systems on motion sensors. For their air conditioning units, they've lowered energy consumption by operating all of the air conditioning units on variable frequency drives. Their high voltage motors They're now on a combination of soft starters and or variable frequency drives, and then low voltage motors are on demand via level instruments and or floats. Oh, there's Jake. Hello, Jake. Welcome. Can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes,
Thank you,
yeah.
Jake.
Yes.
So Jake,
Excellent.
thank you so much for joining. This is Jake H, Senior Program Officer with ICLEI. And Jake, can you just tell the EAC a little bit about your background? I know you were from...
Oh, absolutely. I have an academic background in climate change. I have a PhD from Georgia Tech. And after that, I taught for a little while at the University of Miami. So I have that academic background in climate science and earth sciences. After that, I worked for 4.5 years for Palm Beach County. I was in their Office of Resilience. I was one of the founding members there. So I do have some local government experience, and not just local government experience, but obviously your area since you're in Palm Beach County. Obviously, the county and the town are very different jurisdictions, but you know there are some obvious similarities. What else can I say? I am still based here in South Florida. I'm talking to you from beautiful Lauderdale by the sea. So I do have some experience with smaller communities because I live in one. I've been with ICLEI for 2 months now, so mostly focusing on policy and helping out communities large and small in Florida.
Well, welcome, Jake. Thank you. So, Jake, we're currently on slide 21. We just went over slide 20, and we did touch on some of the infrastructure regarding public charging stations. And I don't know if you want to talk about that now or wait till we get to slide 26.
Can I ask you a question
Yeah,
though,
go ahead.
Lynn?
Yes.
So the things that you were enumerating that have been done,
Mm-hmm.
is it fair for me to assume that they were done after the inventory was taken, or were they done prior to the inventory being taken?
Well, during the inventory, I wasn't compiling that information regarding those climate actions that could be considered climate actions.
Yes.
So I was compiling them after. So I'm not sure when they exactly started. I haven't compiled that information.
Okay.
So this is documenting things that we have done and
Have
things
done.
that are in the works to be done.
So potentially some have already been counted in terms of what our inventory was stated by ICLEI.
Correct.
Okay. And I know that Jeremy wrote to Doug asking him to enumerate, he had written to, I think, all of us and or Jeremy, and indicated a number of things that he had done, similar to what Lynn is saying. And Jeremy wrote to him and asked him to enumerate when they were done so that we could figure out if they could be counted as a savings or not.
Yeah, so when we do our next inventory, that's when we'll be looking at the metrics and quantifying what has been done, and hopefully with the assistance of the ICLEI also. And that would also mean that Doug would have to be capturing those metrics now to feed into that. So that's one of the questions. What are we capturing? What information? What can we capture? What infrastructure do we need to obtain those, quantifiable metrics?
Okay. All right.
Okay. So we'll just go along, and then you can ask any questions you have.
All right.
All right, so we're going to slide 21, just talking about the items from Public Works that have contributed to our carbon reduction. And the last item we were just discussing was Public Works has applied for the FPL Solar Together program. And Jake, in a little while, is going to touch on what programs are available from the utilities companies. Okay, so then just going along, and this, again, is information already provided to you in the prior documents. That is our inventory and climate action plan. This is just our, bullet slides. Landscaping and urban canopy initiatives. As we mentioned, we've earmarked the $75,000 for a tree canopy project that is going to be implemented likely by the end of the year, October 2023. Public Works, I've discussed with Doug, and he's assessed Linear Park as a designated location for wildflowers. which, as I'm sure you know, play a very important role in the ecosystem. And then the village already has codified its Florida-friendly landscaping requirements. Reduce waste generated is the next slide, and as you know, we do outsource our waste disposal through Waste Management, Inc. In the village, you know, some of the items that we're doing, we have reduced our paper consumption significantly. Again, I don't have exact metrics because I haven't captured those, but that will be during our next inventory that we'll be presenting that. We do have access to recycling, and we encourage that. And we do have businesses in the village that encourage sustainability, such as the zero waste business we have in the village and our thrift stores. And for any events we have, we do also encourage them all to buy local food for meetings and events. And under our water quality and conservation initiatives, we limit the use of pesticides. We have distributed water bottles to encourage the use of our water stations, reduce waste. Again, we have our Florida-friendly landscaping requirements. The utilities does water quality testing, and then they also have contracted for a study to determine improvements to the water treatment plant. And the expected carbon reduction for that is 212 tons of CO2 per year. I don't have the exact cost savings yet, but we'll get updated metrics as that project moves along. And then these policies, if they're not already in our comprehensive plan, we could put those general policies in, which would be energy efficiency, renewable energy, incorporating sustainability and resiliency into our capital improvement projects, resiliency against future expected hazards and vulnerabilities, and then green, which would be promoting actions that focus on the environmental benefits. Now, Jake is going to provide us with a high-level policy and programs update looking at the climate actions undertaken by the United States as a whole, by the state of Florida, by the Florida utilities companies, and then provide any recommendations, and you can answer any questions you may have. So over to you, Jake, and we're on slide number 26.
Excellent.
Thank you.
So yeah, Lynn asked me to just give a very broad overview of sort of a few actions that are taking place in these particular spaces, and I thought I'd focus mostly on items that could really directly impact the town of Tequesta in particular. When we talk about climate actions at the federal level by the United States, as you can imagine, it's sort of subject to the vagaries of the various administrations that we go through. So for example, we've been in the Paris Accords, we've been out of the Paris Accords, we've been back in the Paris Accords, but nonetheless there has been sort of strong action at the federal level. A really great example of that is the CAFE standards, which are vehicle mileage standards. A couple of items that you specifically want to take care of are obviously the bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed a couple of years ago, and the more recent Inflation Reduction Act. The name of that act is obviously kind of a little bit of a misnomer. It's not particularly focused on inflation, but it does have a lot of sort of support for local governments doing green and sustainability actions. Because those are so recent, a large part of what we're doing is kind of wait and see. How exactly is that money going to filter down through the state and to local governments? We do know that there are some specific particulars that apply to you. For example, in the bipartisan infrastructure law, there's a fairly large pot of money, about $7.5 billion nationwide, for adding electric vehicle infrastructure along highways. Access to that money requires that certain highways in your region be pre-designated as alternate fuel corridors, and that's something that the state's been working on. And in fact, just last year, US 1, basically from the Keys all the way up to the very north part of the state, was designated or pre-designated as one of these alternate fuel highways. So that means that that money is going to be available to entities within Tequesta, because US 1 runs right through the town, to install electric vehicle chargers, for example. That doesn't mean that the town itself has to start chasing after federal dollars. I know that that's often very onerous, but it does mean that it's going to encourage entities in the region to install electric vehicle chargers along those routes. For example, FPL is right here. It's something that they're very keen on for obvious reasons. Climate actions by the state of Florida. You know, the huge one right now is that over the last couple of years, since Ron DeSantis has been governor, we've seen huge amounts of money coming into the Resilient Florida program at the state level. And that largely has two parts. One of those parts is to create vulnerability assessments for communities, and there's been a large amount of money that's been available for that. As far as I know, 2 years ago, every single community that applied for that money got it. That requires a sort of standardized vulnerability assessment for the community. When I say vulnerability assessment, I mean, you know, you're looking at what your assets are in the community, looking at what the climate risks are, sea level rise, wildfire, things like that. They're pretty well statutorily defined. And then you're sort of looking at what the consequences of that vulnerability would be. So for example, for Fryer Rescue Station, floods during the king tide, that's very, very bad. If a parking lot for a park floods, it's unfortunate, but it's not gonna sort of ruin anybody's day. The second part of that Resilient Florida funding that's really important is that once you have that vulnerability assessment in place, and only once you have that vulnerability assessment in place and it's compliant with state law, you can start applying for implementation funds. So that allows you to sort of look at assets that might be vulnerable to climate change items and find ways to upgrade them. Hopefully I won't bore you by talking about Palm Beach County too much, but as I said, I was there until 2 months ago. We accessed funding for this implementation to do things like harden wastewater plants against flooding, reduce flooding on certain highways through West Palm Beach. Australian Ave, I don't know if you're familiar with that, tends to flood. That's something that we got, I want to say $13 million to fix. The Florida utility companies, you know, from a 100,000 foot view, the easiest way to sort of mitigate climate change and reduce greenhouse gas emissions specifically is to electrify everything and then clean up your grid. Obviously, FPL, which is your local utility, has a great incentive to electrify everything. So they've been doing a lot of work in the electric vehicle space. They have a program called EVolution, I think that's how they pronounce it, where they are reaching out to local entities such as businesses and local governments and offering to install electric vehicle charging systems at their facilities for free or for a very low cost. I would say that they approached Palm Beach County with that offer about 4 years ago. They were going to offer free electric vehicle charging for county employees at certain facilities. The county did end up turning them down due to sort of some legal items that we couldn't see eye to eye to on their contract. But I know that there are other local governments, I want to say Boynton Beach signed up for that program, and they've received free charges. Community-wide, FPL has just rolled out a program, I forget the name of it, where they're going to be providing electric vehicle charges at residences for a very low cost, or for a very low subscription, and FPL will give maintenance and things like that. FPL has been pretty big about rolling out solar power and decarbonizing. They have a plan that they call Real Zero that they say is going to put them at zero emissions for electricity production in 2045. For most communities in Southeast Florida, building electricity is 30 to 50% of all of their emissions. So that would cut that right out immediately. In Palm Beach County, when we've done greenhouse gas emissions inventories, we've seen that changes in the emissions associated with grid electricity have been the largest driver of overall changes in emissions at the community and at the local government operations level. Specific parts of that, as Lynn mentioned, Florida FPL does have the Solar Together program. I don't know how much detail Lynn's gone into that with you, but essentially you pay a subscription fee for a certain amount of solar power to be provided, and you receive a credit for the power that actually gets produced by those panels. The credit goes up over time. The idea is that at first your electricity bills are higher, but after about 5 to 7 years, those bills get lower, and eventually you break even and start gaining more and more money over sort of the 30-year lifetime of those solar panels. Palm Beach County was enrolled in that program and still is. There were some missteps at the beginning, which caused the costs to the county to be a lot higher than we had expected, but those appear to have been ironed out at this point. And then other incentives and ICLEI recommendations. part of your membership in ICLEI, we do provide sort of what we call high impact. I'm sorry, can you hear that?
Yeah.
There's somebody really right above me.
Oh, no, sorry, we can hear that.
We can hear you.
You're fine, yeah.
I am terribly sorry about that. Can you hear me?
It's not
You're
disturbing
fine.
us,
Yeah,
you're much louder than it.
It's not
Yeah, you're
disturbing
fine.
us.
So what we can supply is what we call high impact actions. We can we have sort of a standardized template we can go through, and we say that, you know, if you have a goal for reducing your emissions by a certain amount, if you can increase electric vehicle ownership, that would help by this much. If you can increase building efficiency, it would help by this much. If you take into account FPL's Real Zero program, how will that affect sequesters emissions over time? We can also provide, or Lynn should be able to do it herself through our ClearPath tool, a wedge analysis where you can put in specific initiatives that the town is putting together.
We can't hear that, Jake, we can only
Yeah,
hear you.
you're fine.
Sorry, well, I'm sorry if I'm yelling. I can't hear myself. And that would allow you to assess, you know, if you was to put into place a certain policy. Say, for example, you had increased electric vehicle charges, and you could get some handle on how that might change the sort of community-wide fleet. We can look at how is that going to change emissions over time versus a baseline case. So that's a quite powerful tool that lets you kind of assess what the emissions impact would be. Of course, you'd have to kind of look into the costs by yourself. A lot of efficiency and electrification measures have a relatively high upfront cost, but do pay for themselves over time. A great example of that is putting in LED lights. So that's definitely something you want to take into account. We can certainly help you figure out the mitigation strategies. We also have some other tools to help you figure out things. So for example, I know you want to look at canopy. We may be able to help with that. And be able to help putting together climate adaptation plans. Because of my background, I tend to focus on mitigation. I know that for local governments, adaptation is often more at the forefront. You have immediate problems that you're fixing. If you're flooding from the seawall, it's an immediate fix for an immediate problem, whereas mitigation will not broad and long term. But we can certainly help with those adaptation plans as well. With that, I'll turn it back to Lynn, unless you have questions.
Yeah, any questions?
I do have a question. The panels that you're talking about, the solar panels, what are the life expectancy of those and the efficiency percent?
So we typically expect that the lifetime for a solar panel is going to be 20 to 30 years. If you're talking specifically about the FPL Solar Together program, they look at a 30-year horizon, but your payback period is certainly shorter than those 20 years that you would expect to be the minimum lifetime for solar panels. As part of the modeling that FPL does, they do build in a degradation factor into those solar panels. As you can imagine, they don't just fail at once, they get a little worse year to year. I believe that factor they're building in is about 1%, which is typical for a commercial system.
So you're saying, let me back up for a second, the life expectancy of a panel is about 30 years, which is how you said you, and I might be off, so correct me if I am, but you start to get paid back these residents if they put them in, and wasn't it about at that same time frame?
Sorry, the FPL program I'm talking about, that's a local government program. So
Okay.
the town's requester would sign up for that. There would be off-site solar panels. So it would be sort of an FPL operated site.
I got
In
you.
that case, FPL would meet with you. They'd give you projections that would cover about 30 years. You break even a lot earlier than that.
Okay, thank you.
If you're talking more,
I might have been talking about something other, separate of what you were just discussing, but I thought it was the homeowners, starting to get down to individuals and the businesses within Tequesta and using solar panels as one way of eliminating,
you're absolutely right. If you want to install solar, and typically it would be solar and storage, right? Because you want to be able to use that power, at night.
Right.
Yeah, the reality is that those systems, the break-even point is right around the end of the lifetime for that system. There are other reasons that people would install those systems, if they're environmentally conscious, for example, or in some cases, you can have a disconnect between your system and the grid that lets your power to operate during a grid outage, right? So some people will do it for those reasons, although in those cases, the installation does get a little more complicated. But you're right. Typically, the return on investment period is about the same as the lifetime of this system.
And just a quick follow-up question, you know, because I'm concerned, you know, the landfills and where these panels go once they're done with their lifetime. I did a little bit of reading about recycling of the glass parts if it's not contaminated, but the other metals that are within it. What has your research told you about those panels?
So at the moment, the amount of solar material that is going to landfill or is just nearing end of life is still relatively small. It's like you said, we're talking about a 20 to 30 year lifetime. So we don't have a lot of practical experience with this.
Okay.
It's a similar problem to electric vehicle batteries, right? What do you do with it at end of life?
Right.
With electric vehicle batteries, there's more of this sense that they're going to be able to be used as a source for the materials, right? There's going to be enough demand for lithium that it can drive recycling of those materials. In solar panels, there's a similar sort of sense, but because a solar panel is a much more physically complex object, it consists of very thin layers of materials packaged together. It's more difficult to take apart. And also, the materials in it are not as valuable, which can make less of an incentive for recycling. The fact of the matter is, folks are piloting recycling of these materials. We don't know yet whether that's going to be successful or whether it's going to be economically viable.
Thank you.
Bob?
Yeah, Jake, I want to ask you about the Inflation Reduction Act and the 30% tax credit.
I'm terribly sorry, could you say that again?
I wanted to ask you about the Inflation Reduction Act and the 30% tax credit for installing solar.
I do. Okay. I don't know a whole lot about that.
Yeah, maybe you can't help me with this, but I've been told by the local nonprofit Solar United Neighbors that can extend to municipalities and businesses as well, where they can somehow trade off that 30% savings with some other entity. So it's not only available to homeowners, but also to municipalities. They could save about a third of the cost of an installation. Is that true?
So you're right. My understanding is that typically a tax-exempt entity like the town would not be subject to these sort of tax credits, but there is a built-in mechanism in the IRA that in this case is going to allow non-tax entities to benefit from those funds. I'm not entirely sure how that mechanism works.
Okay, I have a follow-up or two. So the FPL's Solar Together program, my take on it is it's kind of mostly PR for people who join in. FPL is going to build these solar farms anyways, which is great. It's an economic choice for them. I think if an entity or a community or a business were to make a decision on finances alone, it might make more sense to have their own solar panels, start generating their own electricity and paying themselves back, and versus breaking even in 5 or 6 years with the FPL Solar Together and maybe making a couple $100 a year after that with the FPL Solar Together program. Just my...
I say that when I was at Palm Beach County, that was exactly the question we were grappling with. At the county, our largest energy user is our water utility. They already had some on-site solar installed. They wanted to expand their capacity. They were trying to decide, do we put more on-site solar, which they know has worked well, they are experienced with that system, or did they go with the FPL program? And as I mentioned, during the first year that we were enrolled, there were significant cost overruns that we hadn't expected. Those have been ironed out. I don't know what the county is going to be doing moving forward. I think it's a great question. I'm afraid I don't have a great answer for you.
Jessica?
I have a question regarding the mitigation that you had touched on. I recently attended the Seagrass Restoration Research seminar that they had at the Oceanographic Center. And one of the things that they brought up was that with climate change, the seagrass will have to migrate because the depth of water that it will be in that zone will be moving, and so the seagrass will need room to migrate. And the issue that we will encounter is with seawalls, for example, if there is no room for the seagrass to migrate. Fishing is very big in our community, the health of the river, and there's so many different things that obviously our seagrass plays into. And I was wondering if you're aware of any incentives for homeowners to revert to a natural shoreline instead of a seawall, or any sort of programs that you may be aware of for that.
I'm not aware of any incentive programs off the top of my head for switching from seawalls to what you might call living shorelines. I do know that the county you're in happens to be a national leader in living shoreline installations. I would encourage you to perhaps reach out to Deb Drummond County, who is the head of their Environmental Resources Management. And she could probably give you much more information on that. Like I said, they're just world-class installers of that type of system.
Okay, thank you so much.
Lynn, what are you looking for from us at this point in time?
Well, I was presenting to you the items that we have so far for your comment and any questions you have.
Okay.
That's it.
And then for you and ICLEI, what's coming down the pike in terms of things that you may be doing and working on? Like, for example, you mentioned canopy and so forth. Are there other things that you're aware of that haven't been enumerated here today?
I only know the items that have been communicated to me, and then I literally Googled myself, see if
Okay.
there's anything I'm missing historically or anything else. So we will be more just keeping an open discussion with Public Works, utilities, and then seeing what's going to be going into a comprehensive plan as, again, you know, for going forward.
Okay. Yes.
I have a question. Please tell me if it's not the appropriate time, but back to these panels in the village of Tequesta, my thought immediately goes to, okay, where are they going, right? Like Bob brought up.
The life expectancy is over.
The life expectancy, well, and where are they going to begin with? We were talking about solar panel farms. What land, or are they going to be on top of buildings? And you know, the other thing that immediately comes to mind are, I've heard horrible stories about firemen and not being able to access attics when these panels are on roofs, and I'm talking about buildings and residents. So a lot of things come to my mind that if it's going to happen, make sure we're covering all these aspects before we decide where, you know, we're discussing this for our village.
And then it might be good to have Doug Chambers, for instance, come in to discuss, you know, the status of that program, you know, when he has met with FPL or is going to, and involve in the conversation.
So there's
Yes.
options there for how you can install them, where you can install them. You can ground mount them,
Okay.
and you know, the village, I believe, has some space around some of their facility where that may work.
Okay.
Roof mount is
Yeah.
a conventional for homes.
Sure.
But there's questions that come up that I mean, I've researched it for my
Yeah.
own home.
Yeah.
I ruled it out because I can't ensure that they have to get into my attic and they have to perforate through my roof.
Right.
And there's possible issues that could come up, but
Yeah.
certain types of roofs are better than others.
My other concern is with the environment. I go back to, you know, you talk about, okay, so we're going to put up these panels, and what effects does it have on our wildlife? And, you know, all the things that you read about the birds and the animals that live around in the area. the heat that it brings, which is good and bad, right, for a certain amount to that area. I mean, I've even read these, and that's not gonna be to Cuesta because we don't have the land, but those massive farms, planes have to divert how they're getting to their destination, because you can't fly over them because of the heat that it, all the different things that
They do
happen.
interrupt
so-
wildlife corridors as well,
Yeah, yeah,
but yeah, they have to
yeah,
pick the
so
right
it's all,
spots, but
yeah.
it's not as much of a concern in Tequesta.
Not necessarily to Cuesta itself, but you still have the animals and how many panels are going where, and so just things that are, immediately going in through my mind. Thinking out loud.
Jill, one of the options for solar panels that are popular or becoming more and more popular in urban areas are to convert urban car parks to have, in essence, be a carport, the top of which is all solar panels.
Okay.
And so the benefit in a place like Florida to that is you can park your car and get some respite from the blazing sun on top of your car.
Well, that's true.
Plus you power, solar power for electricity, and you have basically free solar to charge the vehicles for the charging stations underneath.
Okay.
That's one of the things I've always been interested in,
Sure.
because there's lots of places to park cars where you could cover it and, in essence, make it a solar carport.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I'm, having worked for municipalities for a long time, there are certain sectors within municipalities, by that I mean the organization, that are reluctant to make changes to the way that their vehicles are powered. And one of the things that I've wondered about, for example, and I have to tiptoe how I say this, but for example, if you're hesitant to go to, say, a electric vehicle in terms of, there's a lot of new trucks on the market that are electrified, then, and if that's not something that the organization is willing to do currently, then what about what I call right sizing? Do you really need a Ford F-250 pickup truck to drive around with shovels in the back of it all day long? I mean, that is overkill to me in terms of, getting, maybe 10 miles to a gallon when you get a smaller, and these new ones, I don't even know what, but they're even more efficient than a Ford F-150, which most of you know what a 150 is. And so I want them to be able to be open-minded about right-sizing. In other words, do you really need a Ford F-150 or 250 for most of the things that you do in the workplace? That's one thing.
There are plug-in hybrids coming in the mid-sized truck sector, which will work perfectly for the village of Tequesta.
That's good to know.
Size truck that they use. And those will get you, I think, 200, 300 miles on electric, no worries about running out of fuel locally.
Yeah. All right, so Lynn, tell me, all right, you guys are working on these things and you have a game plan and you're heading in a certain direction. What do you want us to do to help you?
When you say we.
The EAC.
I'm assisting in passing on information to the
us.
EAC.
Oh, you
I'm not
are?
in procurement, I'm not in public works, I'm not in charge of purchasing the vehicles, etc. So my role is limited. So the question is, what are you asking us to do next, really? From an EAC
Okay, so
perspective.
it's not what I thought. So you want us to tell you.
No, not that I want, but you asked me to come in and present on, this compilation of things the village that I've compiled that the village is already doing. So I'm presenting it to you.
Yes.
So the next steps for me, this is a complete document. We're going to be doing an updated one in 2 to 5 years. The policies going into our comprehensive plan, these will be incorporated as we move forward. For instance, perhaps taking into consideration on procurement. Vehicles take a long time to procure for the municipality, so planning ahead. So I don't want you to think, that I'm doing anything that I'm not. I just think that we just need this open communication.
Well, I think we need to hear from the village council. I think there's this disconnect that we're exchanging information. We're going to comment on what you presented to us. We may have some additional items that we think might add to the conversation, but I don't think we present it to you. We got to present it to council. So
Yeah, for this document, which is what we're here for today, right? Do you have any recommendations or comments on changing any or adding any items that you can think of that are not already incorporated in the document?
Jeremy?
Well, at the last meeting, this came up because the meeting prior to the council, so the council basically directed us, staff, to work with the EAC to come up with goals, policies together to bring back to council. And so that's what I think Lynn has done a good job of putting together what we're working on. If you guys have additional things you want to work on, let's add it to this list. Let's put together a good rough draft to take to council. So as opposed to taking to council, asking for ideas, then bring it back and tear it up, let's take the full thing that we think is all-inclusive to council and let them decide if we're on the right track or not. That would be my thought.
Okay. So, all right, so there are these things that have been done. There are things that are on the near horizon that will likely be done.
They're incorporated in the document,
Yes. So my question is, it appears that the whole world, that's the Western world anyway, the rich part of the world, is focusing on target reductions. What's the goal for the future? What sort of reductions are we going to have? And so when I hear we're doing these things, I don't know how it could translate into numerical reductions of greenhouse gas. You follow me?
That's where the ICLEI tool comes in, the Clear Path tool.
Okay.
That's our best tool right now.
But so should we be attempting to establish a goal? Like, what would be our goal and what time frame would we utilize for reaching that goal? Does anybody else have?
well, I mean, yeah, the goal that's been presented by, was it COP26, the most recent climate summit, World Climate Summit, was I think 50% reduction by 2030, and
You have Jake in front of you. This is a
yeah,
big
he may correct me.
No, you're right. So the typical goal, especially that's been set by that COP, is net zero by about 2050, and that's a goal that we're seeing a lot of local governments adopt, especially in Florida. One thing I would caution is it's very easy to set a goal without really having a solid roadmap of the way to get there. So we see a lot of communities setting those goals and then missing their targets. So maybe it's better to look into what can you actually do and what reductions will that achieve before you start setting the goal. As Lynn mentioned, that's something that we have tools to sort of help you assess. If you come up with policies, we can help you look at what will be the practical outcomes of those policies.
And what's the time frame would you think on that, Jake? If we're setting, looking at, as you say, at the reductions we can achieve, how far in the future should we be looking? Maybe a year goal, or what would you recommend?
Sorry, can you say that again, Lynn?
So those reductions that we're doing, or recommended reductions that we can achieve, plugging those into the ICLEI tool, let's say, what is the time frame? What would you recommend?
So you can kind of work it backwards or forwards. And like I said, the standard time frame that you're looking at is about 2050, right? Can you get to zero by 2050? So you can either sit down with that tool and say, these are policies that the council has appetite for and that we have budget for and that we can do. What will be the outcomes of that? Will we get anywhere near that goal? Or you can work backwards and say, we do want to be net zero by 2050, what do we have to do? And you kind of have to dialogue with ICLEI. For example, in other parts of the country, we might say, a really great policy is to electrify your buildings. Obviously in South Florida, that's not really an option because everywhere's electrified anyway, right? Reducing VMT is also a tough one in Florida just because, the low density and the high temperature makes it difficult for folks to take alternate modes of transportation. So, we can sit down if you want to set those goals and sort of work back and say, this is what you're going to have to do if you want to get there. Well, like I said, you can work forward and say, this is what the town is willing to do. Where does that get you?
Okay. I'm still struggling with trying to figure out, it's kind of like the chicken or the egg kind of thing. Like for example, I remember the council members, it may have come up at that workshop we had for EAC matters. I have a distinct recollection where the concept of the return on investment, the ROI, was important to them. And that becomes less important, obviously, if you're able to secure grant dollars to help you make, capital expenditures and so forth to reach those energy efficiency or greenhouse gas targets. So, and sitting here, this board, some people may think, okay, solar panels is the way to go, and other people may say, well, we need to do this, that, and the other, electric vehicles or other things. How do we focus on the things that we think the village needs to do, is the question in my mind. Is how do we focus on coming up with a way to say, these are the things you need to look at, and so forth.
Well, now we have, we just got handed the report from Lynn a couple of days ago with some of the initiatives they're planning, besides what they've accomplished, and maybe we digest that and come back with comments.
Yeah, now Brad was the only one that remembered the assignment from last month, and he actually sent me his recommendations for attacking the greenhouse gas emissions, and I totally forgot it. It wasn't even on the agenda until Bob remembered and mentioned something to me.
And do those also list the pros and the cons, like a full assessment of each item?
Yeah. There's only so many things we can do. We could probably list them all out and say, okay, is this a good one for us, or is it a bad one, or what works better for us on the list?
I was wondering if there's any data that shows what areas may be the most effective. If there's something that has the biggest reduction impact, the soonest, or something like that. If there was any sort of recommendation.
Yeah, can I just say that I did reach out to ICLEI first to say, are there any municipalities who are similarly sized that have set these reduction goals and have achieved those goals? And there are none currently. So this is quite...
Well, we like being there, yeah.
We're trendsetters.
Yeah, it's good though. We have a very important waterway and a habitat and endangered species here, so there's no reason why we shouldn't be the leaders in this.
Well, the biggest bang for the buck is addressing the ones that are
On that list.
requiring, the most, or are churning out the most greenhouse gases, and it's electricity and driving our cars. That's.
So that would make the most sense to me to start with, trying to.
Wasn't it the wastewater? Wastewater?
This is
Yeah.
community-wide, then you have the municipal
Okay.
breakdown.
So the utility director is present amongst us, and I think I heard her say at a recent meeting that without more revenue, they may not be able to do the energy efficiency thing that's sort of on the table that hasn't yet been done. Did I hear you correctly back on that day?
Marjorie Craig, Utilities Director, you have eagle ears, all I can say. We want to do the project, so for now, right now, this is unprecedented times where we've had the price increases that are, everything is just coming in ridiculous. You guys must be experiencing the same thing. I'm not the only one, it's not all about me, but we want to do it, but because we have some critical things that need to be done at the plant, we've got to fix for the safety of the staff, for the, some of the chemical feeds, the SCADA needs to be upgraded, and we have a pump that we can't even use. So we've got to fix the hydraulic issues there. Optimizing those pumps and adding variable frequency drives will still save us 212 units per year. The addition of the ERD, the energy reduction device, that's actually the fancy term for it, will save additional units.
What do you mean by a unit, Margie?
Do you have the, I have to get my cheat sheet. It's,
Is it a content of greenhouse gas?
Like metric tons of CO2.
yeah. So EPA has a calculator that will tell you how many tons of CO2 per year are saved. And so using that calculator and the improvements that we still have planned for the plant will still save us, it's still going to be a savings. The ERD would be an additional.
So is
About
a
another
unit a
200.
metric ton?
Yes, 212 tons of CO2 per year.
Okay.
Along with, there'll also be some financial savings as well.
Right, right.
And we can document those as we go along into our plan.
Yes. Okay.
Yes, and there's I've got a kind of a fancy spreadsheet that's, if you want to, you could put yourself to sleep with it if you, me, it's exciting, but where we've looked at actually my engineer looked at it, what the savings would be for the high pressure pumps, interstage booster pumps, pressure exchanger device, all that plant work, so.
How much of your vacant land at the water, you may not know, so don't, but how much of that vacant land do you think may be impacted relative to adding different structures and devices to continue to operate the way you are today?
So and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think what you're asking is, if we have further regulation and we need to add some unit processes to the plant, is there room?
Yeah. Well, but it's more complicated that I've always thought that's a lot of land out there that's unused currently, and that'd be a nice place to have a solar array that's ground-based. But since that's your utility plant and you may need to expand things in the future, I'm wondering, how could we determine whether that land is in fact usable for solar input?
So what you want to do is leverage the land in the best way possible. So we do anticipate having to add some unit processes, and so we will be, something that we'll always keep in mind, because what you mentioned before was you can take solar panels and you can put them on top of a garage or a carport, or I'd be loving it if y'all put some carports out there in the parking lot, and we could put, but it takes money. So the question is, can we get grant money for that? How much money can we allocate for that? Some of that land, there's a clear well under it.
There's a what?
Clear well, just the treated water goes into a clear well before it goes out, goes into tanks, and there's usually an underground clear well where, and I don't know the details yet, I'm still learning the plant, as y'all know. Most of y'all probably know that I've only been here a few months. But after the water's treated, there's usually a clear well where it collects before it's sent out to the distribution system. So we have storage tanks that you see. One is used for the filtration plant, because we have 2 plants out at the plant site. And then we have the RO plant. So we have a 2 million gallon tank for that. And then you have a clear well, and it goes out to the system. So the question would be, could you put that weight on top of the clear, those kind of things?
How much, do we know how much land for Village of Tequesta it would take to do this solar?
No,
For the
I don't know.
town? I mean, I guess
You
that's
mean
the
for the whole
first.
town or
Yeah,
the village?
yeah, if we're gonna start going towards that, like, what
Oh.
is it gonna take? Let's look long-term, right?
Mhm.
What is it gonna take to do this? And then we start to look like, okay, well, it's gonna take this much room, then we'll need to look at, okay, well, where is that available?
So does the answer to your question begin with us enumerating how much electricity the totality of Tequesta
I
utilizes?
think so, yeah.
That-
And from there, then, Tom, it would be, okay, well, how much space do we need? How many panels do we need? And what land will that take? Or if it's gonna be on roofs, that would then be the second question, where would these panels go? And then what's the, lifespan of these panels, and then from there.
Right, what's the life cycle, and
Yeah,
then does
yeah.
it affect the roof integrity? I heard
Correct.
you mention that,
Yeah.
and we are always trying to be mindful that
Right.
we're subject to hurricanes.
Right, yeah,
So how do you-
100%, yeah, let's not forget.
And there's
the
that, yeah.
hurricanes.
Panels installed correctly are rated for the upload of 180 mile-an-hour winds.
Okay.
That's definitely something that's in the code, the county code. I've talked to Jose about it.
Okay,
And the panels themselves can withstand the wind themselves, but it's more of the uplift concern.
right.
I-
And then being around our water, I mean, what is there, it's so precious. Do you want anything around our water system? I'm kinda like, well, let's just not put anything around it, but that's ignorant question for me to
It's
be
not an ignorant question at
educated.
all.
Yeah.
But I think what we do is I'm an environmentalist at heart, and we all always are looking for ways and I've told Lynn what I think this is amazing, the document, and I've been involved with them before, and we'll be looking for ways to leverage it with leverage the technology that's available, right? To save energy, to reduce our carbon footprint, to reduce just our imprint in the Tequesta as much as we can. And evaluating where we could put solar panels is just one thing we have to pursue. I suspect there's not a whole lot. I know, Tom, you think it's huge out there, but from a plant standpoint, you always wish you had more room, right? But we can look at it.
Yeah.
Something to look at.
I think the perspective is important though too, and this was in the prior original report, but the Tequesta's facilities, all the government facilities emit 2,100 metric tons of CO2. The community-wide is 46,314, so it's 4.5% of the community. So, the big nut is community-wide. How do we incentivize the installation of solar panels? Maybe reducing or eliminating permit fees would be a thought. I'll just throw it out here for the 10th time, but maybe a solar co-op would be good.
Great idea. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and charging stations, I know where the village is working on it, but for the public, I know there's FBL programs that were discussed. It's all good. More of those, more the better.
Jeremy, you
Agreed.
recommended something from Clear Point at the rec center, but it never did fly, did it?
That is ongoing. We've tried to cancel out of that. They told us that where we were gonna put it, construction, all the specs, and then after we got the piece of equipment, it does not fit where they told us it would fit. And so, currently we're trying to send the devices back and work on some other devices, some other panels.
That would still trying to be near the rec center kind of thing?
Yeah, it'll still be, I mean, we have all the electrical ran that we did with the site work, we just don't have the panels that were coming with it need more space than what we can provide out there.
Okay. Yeah, I remember it was Clear Point, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And just let you know, we have 5 more minutes with Jake in case you have
Okay.
any questions.
Well, so the way we left it before this recent iteration of information was that we were trying to decide, should we focus on the village consumption first or the community first? Or the third option is you just do them simultaneously. Does anybody want to opine on their thoughts about that at this point in time?
I think my opinion would be the village versus, you know, the community. Like the village, because I think then you follow up with the residents, right?
Yes.
Because you really have to kind of know where they stand on all of it.
Right. So I happen to agree with you that the village is the organization, the government is the place to start, because then you can say, okay, ladies and gentlemen, we did this, and its results are this, and perhaps you might like that, or something like that. But some of the people here didn't agree with that, so we need to hear from them.
Yeah, for sure.
Well,
So what were your thoughts, everybody?
I certainly feel leading by example is important, but I do think that there are things that we need to be educating them about and could be doing simultaneously, perhaps not encouraging or asking them to make the changes yet, but even just putting information out to be educating them on the benefits of these things. Because obviously food trucks, or, you know, we've got a lot of cars driving, probably short distances, we've got my children's preschool, you know, there are people that drive the block down to the banyan tree to go play after school. There are things where if people are aware that the community is all aware of these things now and maybe noticing others doing them, it may become more of a conscious decision to walk because they know that there was just something in the smoke signals or something that they saw, encouraging, or, you know, educating them about the benefits and how they can be helping reduce things, you know. So for me, it would be concurrent.
Yeah.
Perhaps a different strategy, you know, more like of an education,
Well, an education while
campaign
you're
for the
doing it,
public
right.
while we're implementing for
Yeah,
ourselves
that-
as the
that-
village.
That I like, because I wouldn't forego the distribution of information
Right.
and education, even if we were focusing on the village.
And just in my experience, it takes a while for the public to catch on to something and then begin to implement it. So I think that there would be a gap between when we would be educated, if we just focus on the village, you know, there's like that educational period that we would want to see action after the village has just done it. So I think that concurrently it might work well. And then we can ask them to follow our lead, the village's lead, you know.
What about you three gentlemen here, Russ and Brad and Bob? What are your thoughts on this?
I concur.
You concur?
Well, I think initially, maybe the last meeting, I said we should go after the two major offenders of the greenhouse gases first. The one in the community and the one in the village. But I know we talked at great length the last time we got together on this, and I guess you want to do what will work first. And to your point, I think the easiest, the lowest hanging fruit would be the village. Focus our efforts. I like the education idea of the community as an example. I think that would be my vote.
Okay, Bob?
I don't think it's a heavy lift to sort of, to do both at the same time, because there isn't much we could do community-wide beyond educate them, let them know about the 30% tax credit, maybe coerce the village to drop permit fees on installing solar, pushing them for more charging stations, and what else can we do with the community, you know?
What about putting out a questionnaire for people? What do you see? What would you like to see in our village? What, you know, and kind, you know, with the education part of it, put it out there, but also get them involved
And I love.
and what they would love.
Yeah, I love involvement. I just think that we should tell them what we've found out based on this
Correct.
data and
Yeah,
let them know.
correct.
You know what,
Yeah.
for this particular thing, I would just be telling them personal, or like letting them know what they can do that will be most effective, you know?
Lynn, are you aware, have we done any public info, say through smoke signals or online about the
We
green?
need to check with the clerk. That's the
Okay.
clerk's purview. And Jake, thank you so much for your time.
Thank
Really
you,
appreciate
Jake.
all the information.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Jane.
folks. If you have any more questions, Lynn can get in touch. She knows where I am.
Yes.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
very
Have a
much.
good day, Jake. Bye-bye.
I wrote an article on solar probably 2 years ago, though, in smoke signals. but-
Yes, I remember.
But we could update that, and
Well, but would now be a good time to say, let the community know we're working on greenhouse gas reductions, and here's some things we're thinking of, and share your comments and thoughts with the village in some form or fashion, we would say, within such an article.
Mhm.
Any,
Yeah.
sound like a good thing? Okay. And then, so if it sounds like we have a consensus that we should focus on the government first, but simultaneously educating and cranking out information. And I think one of the things I remember learning early on in my career was a thing called adaptive management. So if you have this plan and the world is not going the way you thought it would, you adapt and you come up with a, it's called on the fly, coming up with an alternative to get to wherever it is you want to go.
I call that calling an audible in my
Right.
household.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, an audible. Okay, so we'll do that, and I'm gonna study some of the, myself, some of the things that we could be doing and see if I could put them to paper and come back here and see if we can get some consensus on those, you know, like solar would obviously be on the thing, but there might be some other stuff that we might want to focus here at the village on.
and comment on what Lynn and staff in the village
Yeah,
is.
anything you
Right.
wrote, any comments that we could potentially incorporate into our plan?
Yes, okay.
So we all come back next month with those thoughts?
Yeah, if you have the time, look at the data and the options to address the greenhouse gas and come up with thoughts and ideas about what we might focus on, what you think in your world, what Tequesta might accept or be open to or curious about, and we'll then, with laser accuracy, we will try to address those things that we come up with as a group. Yes, ma'am?
Does anybody know if there's a way to make, or, well, I guess our golf cart, like what about any of the vehicles that we see going around? Those are all, like, golf carts are electric, so those are
That's true. These aren't propane, right?
some,
Some are
okay.
gas, some are propane, some are most are electric, I think.
I'm trying to think of like smaller things that people might be able to, you know, like again, or even taking, are we allowed to promote golf carts though, or riding? Like, is
Well,
that,
there's a law in Florida that,
they're not, is,
golf carts that are registered as a vehicle are allowed anywhere.
right,
But if you are not registered as a, DMV registration, I think it goes like this: you can only drive such a cart in places that are posted
Right.
and allowed, such as within Tequesta Country Club.
right. Because, I mean, I remember sitting in the council meeting, there was a council meeting where they were talking about golf carts and making them street legal. Do you remember vaguely
Yes.
something
Oh, yeah,
to that
definitely.
effect? Because, you know, I mean, that, I don't know, in terms of like using that for shorter trip, you know, an incentive for people that are, you know, it's like if you can't beat them, join them type of it's like trying to figure out a way, bicycles, golf carts, walking, you know, those are all things, even on like vacation islands, Okra, there are places that don't allow cars, you know, and people get around with other forms of transportation that are greener.
Yeah, I'm personally a fan of electric bicycles.
Yeah, right. So, you know, those are things that, again, we could be encouraging the residents to turn towards, you know, because it also helps reduce things. I just don't know how people would feel about that.
Well, we'll find out. Won't we?
Oh, yeah.
Let's see what we got here. So Lynn, thank you very much. If you want to stay, you're welcome.
No, I'm all good, thank you so much.
Thank you. Let me find my way here. Where is this thing?
Or taking the boat to dinner at the rest, you know, like with the bridge out and cars driving.
Bridge.
Yeah, exactly. You know, if there are recommendations we could make that would also be reducing, you know, greenhouse gas and also trying to establish lifestyle changes, you know.
Correct, and the things that people can adapt
Right, that are easier,
have less
adapting,
resistance, make it attractive.
Yeah,
the
small
stuff-
changes that
correct.
make them feel like they're help. You know, it is.
If the
you gotta start
information that we're
small.
releasing is daunting,
Right, they're not going to take
not,
to it.
Not going to read it, not going to
Right.
embrace it, not going to do it.
It's
But if it's
extreme.
attractive,
Right.
if it's achievable, if it's actionable, much less resistant.
Yeah, I agree.
You know, the world is definitely changing because I was in Palm Beach this morning at 7 a.m. and I was totally surprised at the number of people jogging, walking, and riding bicycles. It was I was literally kind of nervous driving. There were so many of these people that were doing it. It was good, you know, it was great. 20, 15 years ago when I worked there, that was not the case.
We used to take our bicycles down there to ride when I
Yeah,
was a
the Lake
kid.
Trail,
But
yeah.
yeah. But
It was-
it is definitely a shift, though.
Definitely. So the other thing that's on the agenda now, if you want to deal with it, we can put it off and do it next time, but we were asked by the village manager to deal with the subject matter of green buildings and green infrastructure. And I wrote in this memo that after I wrote the memo that it occurred to me that it would be best if we just focused one at a time. And it's up to you guys if you want to do it today or you want to postpone it, whatever. Typically, we're supposed to try to be out of here by 4 o'clock.
I just have a general question. How are we to contribute to this? I don't know enough to
Well,
add anything.
so currently, the village, this is my take, okay? The village does not have anything in their code pointing to or suggesting or whatever you want to call it, green buildings, okay? It's nothing there. I'm sure, I'm not positive the more I think about it. The Florida Building Code probably allows it, and therefore Tequesta probably allows green building. The question is, how do you encourage people to go down that path, okay? There are all kind of benefits, both the internal air quality of the home is improved, the pollution that is generated from the act of construction is reduced or almost non-existent, and depending on how far you go. And so there are a variety of reasons why it would be good if more construction was green. And so the next thing is that in all probability you need to encourage them through incentives to build green. And There are a number of things that were mentioned in this memo that I wrote that they're structural and some other types. And some of them I think we could use in Tequesta to make it more possible that people would do it. It really comes down to, do you believe it's a good thing? Most people say, yeah, it's a good thing, because you could see in that chart there that I gave you was the aspects of the built environment. You know, all of these things, just so the public hears it, the siding of a building, the design, the construction, the operation, maintenance, renovation, and deconstruction, meaning, you know, demolition. All of these things generate consumption of energy, of water, materials, and natural resources. And the environmental effects are waste, air pollution, water pollution, indoor pollution, heat islands, stormwater runoff, and noise. And the ultimate effects are harm to human health, environmental degradation, and loss of resources. So that's not to say that we're going to stop building. They're just to say is that there are other ways of building where these things are not as significant. So there are structural incentives and financial incentives, and it's up to us to make those recommendations per what Jeremy asked us to do. What could they do to put something in their code, and what sort of a rating system would they use? And as I mentioned in this memo, that LEED, L-E-E-D, is the most common one, but it is not the only one. You'd be very surprised to see how many options are out there for green buildings. And some of these things I didn't say it in the memo, but some of these things could be done in Tequesta. The financial incentives, even tax credits, if you want to go that far. I don't know that they have the money to do it, but it can be done. So that's what we're looking at, was what do we need to put in the code, and how do we incentivize people to do it? That is the essence of our assignment.
I think credit back financially is gonna get people's ears popped up.
Yeah.
If they're gonna do, you know, any of that, or like you said, the tax credit, any of that is gonna get the attention of a resident. And or a developer, or commercial buildings, you know, in that sense. There are definitely a bunch of different ways for the green building. I agree with that. I have to do a little more research on it, but I think that's a great thing for our village. The infrastructure, I love that idea. I like the impervious blocks with the grass and the parking lots. You know, it's almost looks like a park when there aren't cars in there.
Right.
Instead of just paving over our planet with all these parking lots and roads, there got to be ways to help, you know, with all of that.
There's
for
nothing in our
infrastructure.
code to require commercial buildings to have any efficiencies in energy conservation?
As far as I know, if such exists in the Florida Building Code, that would be the only thing that is de facto in Tequesta as well. I think I'm going to go on a limb here and say, I think there are things in the Florida Building Code, in like the mechanical aspects of the code, where they might even require things like the variable speed compressors and air conditioning and all these other things, that pumps and so forth, but I'm not positive.
Wouldn't Nilsa be the one to have the best resources in her mind of what to advise the village?
Well, I'd have to think about that. Ordinarily, I would say yes, but you see, in Tequesta, they have the Department of Community Development, is a separate entity from the building function. And they don't always mesh and or communicate properly with one another. And I find that to be a problem. Most agencies, meaning municipalities and counties today, it's all under one roof. So in that circumstance, when it's all consolidated, the director of community development oversees the building official reports to that person, and it's all, everybody's walking in unison theoretically. That's not happening in Tequesta. I wish they would. I have suggested it to the council, and they have not. They looked at me, like cross-eyed, like, what are you talking about? But it's very common. Trust me, it's very common. I don't know, but it is what I've already summarized is what they expect. Jeremy's asking us to do. It's what to put in the code and what incentives to utilize. Can you imagine if someone in Tequesta, let's say there was a tear down in, say, on River Drive in the Tequesta Country Club, and this person used the LEED concept and got the platinum rating, and we put that in the smoke signals and on our website about what they did. Maybe more and more people would start saying, I want to do that too,
Because the houses are getting torn down.
Yeah, they are.
It's one by one, and they're coming down quicker and quicker, and we need to wrap ourselves around that before it's more than it is.
Yeah, and you know what's coming when that happens, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
The little bitty ranch house like me is looking up at people looking down at them.
Already.
And that,
It's already. That's right. So, yeah.
That's going on in Palm Beach right now and
Yeah.
North Palm Beach.
Oh,
They're
the
like-
wave is coming straight up from the south.
But again, we don't, I'm not schooled in LEED certification where someone else like Nilsa might be, so why wouldn't they defer to her? Or maybe you guys are.
Well, in a sense, we don't need to be. Let's just say that we said LEED is it. Everybody's on board with LEED, and we're going to use LEED. Let's just say hypothetically that's what we do. We don't have. There's all those categories. The guy or gal that's doing the home can say, well, I want to be gold, not platinum, or I want to be silver, or whatever the rating said. They don't have to go all the way to the top. But they save more energy and they have less of an impact to the environment the higher they go.
Yeah.
So, it's all pretty much outlined in that memo about what our options are, and we can throw them out there, and if they stick to the wall and they do something with them, so be it, or they just reject it, who knows?
I would think that LEED, having a recognizable name would be something that they might want to be able to say down the road or something, even, who knows, in however many years, I don't know, for real estate, that, to say that your home was certified as a LEED green building or something. Somebody else may be interested in that, down the road, or no?
Yeah.
Whereas if it's just a
agree.
random,
Yeah.
I would think, right? Wouldn't you
Absolutely.
want to have, like, the most
Yeah.
recognizable name doing the,
Right.
for the residents to say that they have met the standards of,
Right.
is what I would think.
Is there any way for us to get, or ask for somebody who is certified in these green builds to come in and talk to us? That has not just the LEED, but the other types of green build that can educate us a little bit, so we,
Or,
sound like we know what we're
Even- or,
talking about
yeah,
and
even-
asking for?
Yeah,
Even
I would
hosting
hope
something
that
like
that's
that for
possible.
builders.
We have to give it a little thought. But
Yeah.
what
I was just saying, even hosting something for builders or people to learn about what
Yes,
it is, because
yes.
it's not just us, and I don't know how many
Right.
people come to these meetings that would be learning, but, if we could say the Environmental Advisory Committee is hosting this, join us, or, watch on Zoom or something.
Yes.
There may be builders that, or developers that would be interested.
And they can come back and watch it, they don't have, it doesn't have to be live, they can go back and it'll be
Yeah.
on there for them to, educate as well.
I remember when I was working in Palm Beach that I met some people who, when they were introduced to me, said that they were LEED certified. And so somebody like that maybe could be tracked down and ask them to come and speak to us on,
And I think specific to South Florida with hurricanes and everything, I mean,
Right.
you know, that really knows our area and what's available and how they've done it in, you know, other communities around
Well, the
South
green,
Florida.
I can't remember if I mentioned it in the memo, but LEED is a program of the United States Green Building Council.
You break it down.
And maybe we could contact the U.S. Green Building Council and say, hey, can you point us in the direction of somebody that could come and educate us on
Yeah.
LEED?
Even by Zoom, however we
Yeah.
need to take care of that, but I think it would be really educational for all of us to have some insight.
You two don't know this, but I'm getting ready to go out of the country for about a month.
Nice.
And so can someone volunteer to reach out to the U.S. Green Building Council and ask them,
I will.
is there someone that could come and speak to us at some future meeting?
They do have, I'm looking here, like a 2023 Lead for Cities Local Government Leadership Program application, something we could, you know, and they have, you know, it's a program that supports U.S. local governments committed to certifying in the Lead for Cities rating system, who also see value in the peer-to-peer networking and collaboration that comes with participation in a national cohort.
Yeah.
But again, can you bring me up to speed? Has the council been resistant to incentivizing this? Because at the end of the day, why is the homeowner gonna do it? Why is the builder gonna do it if Village of Tequesta is not going to either give tax credits, give expedited permitting, just to do it for the panache of being able to say, oh yeah, you're not going to get that many people to go.
No.
Have they been previously against it?
No, not that I know of. See, let me give you my opinion on size. My opinion, it's not fact, it's my opinion. So all of many people don't realize that the village comprehensive plan has, in fact, I think it was in this housing element that we just looked at, that there are references to the village will, these are my words, facilitate green building and things like that. I don't think the council knows about it.
Okay.
I don't think they're fully cognizant that keep in mind, this was adopted, let's say 2017. A lot of new people are on the council. They probably have no idea if the comp plan could be that thick if you put it all together, and who's going to sit down and read it?
Right. I'm just walking myself through the scenario
Yeah.
like you just said. I live on Riverside Drive. I just bought a tear down, and I'm very environmentally conscious. Yeah, Mr. Builder that I hire, making me platinum LEED certified. There currently is no incentives in place from the Village of Tequesta to give to that gentleman for doing it.
As far as
Correct?
I know, that's
Okay.
correct.
And I have to tell you, green building is much more expensive than.
Right, exactly.
So you have to give incentive to people because they're gonna say, well, it'll cost me this much to be green certified and this much to just get my house done. And,
Right.
I mean, we're talking in today's market, they're already struggling to just have the house.
Yeah.
And be in this area.
That's
So
right.
there has to be an incentive and a good one for these people to do it.
I mean, fortunately, we're starting to get into a climate where people are willing to pay more for organic food versus this food, and you know, there's arguably a cost justification
Sure.
to be had there as well. So yeah, there is still something for the good of the heart, but I can't understand why we wouldn't be embracing more builders and homeowners to do this. So yeah, we can definitely look into it, and I don't think any of us are experts, so I'll
Right.
certainly do my reading.
Mhm. Well, Jill, if you can find
Yeah.
somebody to come, that would be great. And we just,
Absolutely.
if you, doesn't necessarily mean that they would be here by April, but if
Right,
somebody.
I'll ask them when
Yeah.
they're available.
When they can do it would be great. So, we'll leave it at that then. We don't really
Okay.
need to do anything further for today on the green building. Now, the green infrastructure is a whole other subject, and, you
That
know,
I'm gonna love.
if you've all probably traveled outside of the area, and you go like to places like Portland, Oregon, and others, I think I've seen it in even Columbus, Ohio, where they have the bioswales. They build a new building, and right between, say, the sidewalk and the building is a bioswale. They're capturing all of the water, and what that article, or what I wrote, said was the essence of green infrastructure is to keep the water where it landed.
Yeah.
And percolate into the ground, and to minimize runoff to the maximum extent possible. And I was very pleased that the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council, when they did their recent charrette here in Tequesta for Bridge Road, they recommended a bioswale right down the middle of the street with, you know, landscaping, the whole 9 yards, parallel parking, bicycle lanes, sidewalks. I thought it was a great idea. Because if you've ever been here if you've been here long enough, you know that when the rain is heavy, if you stand at the east end of Bridge Road, say on Old Dixie, and you look west end, and you look east, you can tell that you are looking uphill towards US 1. And that means when it rains, that water's all coming straight to the west on Old Dixie, and that's why at the bottom of that slope, in front of the cement plant, it
Always
floods. Because it exceeds the capacity of the drainage system to get it off the streets. And so they knew, I'm sure they knew by virtue of the topography, that bioswale in the middle of Bridge Road would be a great thing to capture the water. So unless there's any other concluding comments under the subject, the heading of any other matters, does anybody have anything they'd like to bring up right now? Any other comments or thoughts for the day? That being the case, does anybody want to make a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Second.
Is there a second? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. The meeting is over, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for being here. And don't forget your little drinking
Oh,
things.
indeed. How could I forget that?
You probably have scores of them in your, like I do.
That'll go in my special cabinet.